Hello.
What was the best thing about the 90s and the worst thing about living in the 90s?
The best thing about the 90s was getting to be in my teenage years and my 20s in the 90s. That was really, really fun. Getting to go to college in the 90s. Now, the 90s themselves, I think the music was fantastic. The 90s was a time period of hope in America. The Cold War ended. There was no really huge external threat. The economy started to boom. We were paying down our national debt. We had a president that I liked, and it felt like we could solve problems in the 90s. And then you have the advent of this really cool technology. You know, the internet, the personal computer and the internet. And I remember in '94 going online for the first time. No, wait, '93. It was '93. Yep. Getting my first email account in like '95. That was pretty fun.
All right. And in what ways would you say the 90s are different or unique in any way other than our decade or past decades? How is it different?
The 90s were very different from the current decade. We currently have an economy that's struggling. We have no new radical inventions in terms of communication and tech. Although there are some on the horizon, they're just not being widely accepted by the population. We have real external threats that have caused military buildup and war, and we've been in a constant state of war for the past 10 years, actually 12 years. And I actually kind of feel bad for kids your age because you've grown up in this state of war. Now I grew up in a state of war. The Cold War was real. The threat of nuclear holocaust was palpable in the 80s. But in the 90s, that was over. And to have that feeling of war and constant doom and our enemy is going to get us, to have that suddenly lifted and to have no enemy and to feel free to just go about living your life, that was really something. And it's something that I hope that this generation gets to experience.
So you would say it was better than today?
I would say in terms of international relations, things were much better than today. I would say that the two wars that we fought over the past decade have strained our relationship with certain countries. It has certainly polarized international opinion about us. That and the concurrent economic crisis of the 2000s that's led into this decade has also heightened tension. And we didn't have that in the 90s. You know, there was a little bit of an economic downturn, but for the most part, it was a boom time economically. People were getting rich.
Oh, okay. And the last question: what things have changed as a result of things happening in the 90s, such as political scandals or clothing styles, technology?
Telecommunications has definitely changed as a result of the 90s. The personal computer. It got small in the 90s and it kept getting smaller and smaller. I mean, you're freaking holding a camera, you know, and a phone and a computer all in one in this tiny little box. And part of that is the technology that came from the 90s. And I find the technological innovations really amazing. I think that the music today harkens back to the 90s. Rap became really, although it became popular in the late 80s, it became really big in the 90s. And I still hear a lot of the music from the 90s today, although the music of the 90s is now classic, which irritates me. I think the music of the 90s is in large part better than the music today. I definitely prefer music from the 90s, but that's just because that's when I came up. I think pop music today is too poppy, and it makes me roll my eyes. When I was living in the 90s, gangster rap and grunge music were the top selling styles of music. And today it's beeper and like bubblegum pop, and I don't know what you guys are thinking when you're spending your babysitting money on that kind of stuff. But pop music, popular music today, I think it's sad. I'd much prefer alternative music. Today's alternative music is awesome. Electronic is great. But all of it comes from like the various branches that came from the 90s.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Crowell.
You're welcome.